Yep. Okay. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We've just had some questions on the confidential attachment to item 7.1, which is the tender for the supply and installation of gym equipment at Beatty Park. Are there any further questions in the open session not relevant to the confidential attachments? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on. Item 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 30th of September 21. Any questions? Director, just in relation to, I know I ask this a lot, but in relation to Devco, there's another significant payment of over $150,000, which just says maintenance. And I know that you're looking into how to categorise that expenditure better, but for the interim period, is there any way of breaking that down to at least by property or venue so that it's not appearing in such large general quantity?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll ask the officer who prepares that ledger if they can provide a little bit more detail based on what's on the invoice.
That'd be helpful in the interim. Thank you. Any other questions?
It's just a question, just for future. I was just wondering, I can see that when you're presenting these, it's sorted by the payee's name. I'm just wondering whether it's more appropriate or useful to sort by the cost from highest to lowest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think we sorted it alphabetically at the request of a previous at a previous meeting, and it was to allow elected members to be able to compare lists from one month to the next month. It gave us a little bit. It's a bit easier to kind of do a compare and contrast. But I'm happy to take suggestions. We can do it either way.
If I just ask a follow-up question, if councillors are interested, could that table be provided? I assume it's an Excel spreadsheet, so could that actually be provided so then councillors could filter the spreadsheet? Is that possible?
So provided in a spreadsheet form?
Well, if it's available, I'm assuming that it's a spreadsheet that's been converted to PDF. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So just in terms of our processes, it'll be an additional step to send it out to elected members manually. I'm happy to organise that if it's useful. I
guess it depends. I'm quite satisfied with how it is, but that remains an option, just for consideration. Councillor Gonchevsky?
Oh, no, just that, yes, previously I think they were sent out in Excel, but it was challenging with the iPads to get them to work, but they were loaded to Docs on Tap in Excel, but if they could be sent via email with Excel, then councillors could open them on their desktops from their email browser. So that would be very useful. Thanks.
Through Mayor Cole, perhaps if I distribute it by Excel for the next 2 or 3 meetings, and then we can reassess and see if that's a useful process.
That sounds like a very good idea. Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Can I just ask a related question on that? I think we talked about moving to Microsoft Teams for the distribution of docs, and I note that you can share spreadsheets and things like that pretty easily through that. Have we made any progress on switching out of Docs on Tap?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we had converted all previous councillors to 365, and I just need to confirm that the 3 new councillors and their iPads are ready to go on that as well.
That's very good news. But in addition to that, can I also request that there's some training provided? I have very minimal knowledge of MS Teams. I do use it, but it's scary. But I'd very love to see the change. That'd be great. Any other questions on expenditure? Okay. Item 7.3, financial statements as at 30th of September 21. Questions? Okay. 7.4, invest. Okay, go ahead.
7.3. Just the question is in relation to the Capex and funding summary on page 3, where it talks about the full year budget for Capex is 22.1 million, and in Q1 we spent 2 million of 22 million, which is considerably low for given that it's 25% of the year, but we're actually 1 million over budget already. So is it possible to get any further explanation on that item?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I can certainly get some more information on that, and I'll put in the briefing notes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I had one other question, which is minor, just on the Beatty Park finances on page 34. The health and fitness showed that the Q1 revenue figure was significantly over budget, but it doesn't look like the annual budget had actually been revised and reflected in the budget review. So I'm just wondering, does the budget actually get recalibrated every quarter, or is it just like, every 6 months, or just what's the process?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, the first quarter budget review that we're about to discuss will actually do that. And we do it one more time during the financial year, which is at the mid-year budget review. So there's 2 reset moments.
Okay.
Both of them come through council and are approved. And so after this council round, if the first quarter budget review is approved, then you'll see that those figures will be adjusted in terms of the budget reference points.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Right. Item 7.4, investment report as at 30th of September 21.
So it's just minor. In the summary of key investment decisions, it talks about 3 transactions undertaken in September, but only 2 were listed. So I'm not sure if that's just a typo or something's been omitted.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I believe that there were 2 transactions that totaled one of those figures, but I can organise for that to be broken down for you.
Anything further? Okay. Item 7.5, first quarter budget review 21-22. Any questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Sorry, I just had to go back. I had just one follow-up question from our workshop on this item, and it just related to in the previous documentation provided, there was a reference to enterprise applications upgrade with a $221,000 additional allocation into this financial year. And I just wanted to get clarification as to what the total spend in both 2021 and 21-22 on enterprise applications upgrade is, and I guess also if there's any variance to what we had sort of discussed previously in relation to that, and what is being delivered for that. I'm aware that there's a number of applications, authority and so on, are being updated. So
through Mayor Cole, I'll provide a bit of a summary of what we've spent in terms of enterprise management applications last financial year and then intended for this financial year. Is that does that respond to the question?
Yeah, it does. I guess specifically just to get clarification around this $221,000 figure, as to confirm that is that was essentially a carry forward that wasn't able to be recorded as such.
Yes, that's right.
Councillors? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Councillor. Just also just in relation to I note that there's the $375,000 for the Norfolk Street North-South Stage 1 that has been removed, and but there is still $50,000 in the budget corrections for designing the bike network plan. I just wanted to check in relation to the detailed design for the Norfolk Street and get confirmation on I think it was the Glendalough bike lanes that were also being designed this year. Are those 2 projects still occurring?
So through Mayor Cole, just to confirm, the 2 things we're checking on is the Norfolk Street design, make sure that's included, and then the bike planning for Glendalough.
I think it was design. My understanding is that we were doing design for both Glendalough and Norfolk Street this financial year. And just to get some clarification, because I note that there was funds for Norfolk Street design and deliver. That was
Yes.
incorrectly allocated to this financial year when the intention should have been just to design. Just
Yep.
want to confirm that there is funds allocated for design.
Yep.
And that also funds haven't been reallocated from the Glendalough design. So so I can confirm that the 3 bike network related activities we're doing this year is reviewing the bike plan, designing Norfolk Street and designing Glendalough. That's my understanding. And if I could just get clarification that that's the case.
Thanks. I'll take that on notice. Thanks, Mayor Cole.
Councillor Apollo.
Thank you. I just got a question about the opening surplus, because I think that the opening surplus is obviously an important number because it's the starting point for when we actually calculate the amount we're trying to recover from rates after we've done all our budget. So I note the opening surplus as at 1 July 21 increased by $1 million, resulting in an overall budget surplus of 500,000.
Yep.
I'm just trying to understand whether this number includes any favourable variance from Capex from prior years. So to the extent that we didn't spend our entire budget on Capex, actual versus budget, does that favourable variance for monies not spent, is that included in the opening surplus?
Okay, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice. I haven't seen the detail of the breakdown since it was adjusted. It's going through the auditors at the moment. So let me do the detail and I'll come back to you on that.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Layden.
Just a query on the Glendalough bike lane as well. Is that impacted by potential changes to the intersection of Main Street? I understand there's some barriers around that project proposed at the corner of Main Street and Scarborough Beach Road.
Yeah, well, I think Mayor Cole will take that one on notice as well. Thanks.
You want to ask another question? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, there were attachments to this, and I can't. They've disappeared. It might be user error, but I remember when I was looking at it before on one of the attachment 5 on the last page, page 16.
Yep.
There was an item enterprise software.
Yes.
And that enterprise software upgrade increased from 238,000 to 452,000. But there was no explanatory comment or justification for that 200,000 plus increase.
Yes.
If we could have
any. I think, Mayor Cole, I think that was a similar question to Councillor Gonchachevsky. No, that's fine. So I'll
flicking through.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's
sorry.
No, that's all good. So the enterprise applications will provide a little bit of detail in terms of what we spent last year, what's been carried forward, and what we're intending to spend this year.
Thank you.
Director, this is just a very straightforward question, which I think I already know the answer to, but I just wanted to clarify with the grant money received. So where we've got, for example, North Perth Bowling Club and Margaret Kindergarten.
Yeah.
I had thought that we had included that already in the budget, but is this saying that we hadn't included that because the grant money hadn't been received and now it has?
That's my understanding, Mayor Cole, is that we've got the grant money, but we didn't have the corresponding capital expenditure. And so this now adjusts that to reflect that change.
Okay, thank you. And just in relation to the electrical infrastructure renewal at 300,000, where it says reallocation to fund urgent electrical work safety priority, is that's not Beatty Park, that's something separate?
It is, it is Beatty Park, Mayor Cole. So it relates to the electrical works in the grandstand. That is part of that broader Beatty Park project.
Okay, I also thought that we had already allocated that funding for the annual budget.
There is that broader Beatty Park project, and there was finances provided within that project scope for that piece of work. And we will be bringing a report to the December meeting to break down the status of the Beatty Park project and the funding that's been provided and the amount of money that's left over. The request that I received through administration was that we ensure that we do have a clear provision set aside at this first quarter budget review to ensure the timely completion of those works while the remaining project is actually being reconciled, and that we can bring the project status report back in December.
Okay, but then should that first column current budget be presented as a dash? Because my understanding is that that was already
Yeah.
allocated. So I think that needs to be reflected as what was allocated and that this is additional.
I think this, the reason that I have that as a dash on page 2 of the report is that the Beatty Park Capital Works is actually shown elsewhere in the broader capital schedule. So this is just, that table is reflecting movements in and out according to a particular number that I'm tallying up to. So it's reflecting the fact that, yeah, so the overall capital works for the Beatty Park project are shown in the capital works schedule in more detail, but this is just reflecting changes.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand. So the original scope of works had included the electrical infrastructure renewal as part of the budget set by council. The way I read this is that this is additional $300,000. It's not a movement from Beatty Park into something else. So I just don't think that that's clear to council or community that that's actually an additional $300,000 towards the Beatty Park project.
So Mayor Cole, if I can point elected members to on attachment 5, which schedules the detail for the capital budget. On the first page under Beatty Park Leisure Centre, it has 4 line items, and it actually indicates what the carry forward figures are for the Beatty Park project for 21-22. And so it does show that there is amounts there for the facilities infrastructure renewal, concourse tiling, and repair and maintenance of the grandstand.
Sorry, Director, which page number is that? Because attachment 5 is quite long.
It's actually on the front page of attachment 5.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just get it up in front of me as well. So we have the title is Land and Building Assets, and then there's one item for Admin Centre, and then the next item on that page is Beatty Park Leisure Centre. And then there are 4 transactions underneath that schedule.
So we are agreeing to these project scope changes through Q1 budget review rather than through a revised project plan coming to council.
This is the request that I've been asked to put forward. The suggestion has been that the detailed project reconciliation is brought to council's review in December, and that if there is any adjusting items required based on what we sign off today, then that will be reconciled back at that point in time.
I had understood that any significant change to the scope in terms of the funding allocation that we would that we would concurrently receive a revised Beatty Park project scope change report, because if I'm understanding this correctly, there are 3 amounts here, which is tiny and in print here. I'm trying to read it. Something like 455,000, 65,000 and 300,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that schedule is showing that we originally had a carry forward figure of 1.5 million and we reduced it down to 1 million. So there was a downward variance of 465,000. So what that's reflecting is that we originally expected that we would be carrying forward 1.5, but when we did our reconciliation at 30th of June, we only needed to carry forward $1 million on that particular part of the project. So on that particular item, management is saying that the 465,000 was expended last year and is not required in this year.
Michael, if I add something about the infrastructure what infrastructure we're trying to do. So I think one of the issues was that there is that budget line called facilities infrastructure renewal, for which a number of items, tiling, filtration, there's a number of items. And so what we're seeking to do is create a separate budget line and be very clear about what that's for, because there's some confusion about the other one, if you know what I mean. But you are correct. We're suggesting that we take underspend or money that's not needed from other projects to create the 300,000 budget, which will then allow us time to sort out the facilities infrastructure renewal budget, which is that top line you see, which is that will be the subject of a December council report. So you are correct. At the moment, that is money sourced from other locations to create a separate budget line to do the electrical works. But there will be a report coming, and there will be surplus left over in the facilities infrastructure. We just need more time to sort that out, and that's scheduled to come to December with the necessary documentation to make those changes.
Oh, no. So, Mayor Cole, just to, if I understand your question, this request is that there is an additional $300,000 being asked to be added to the Beatty Park project, in addition to what council has
Thank you,
previously approved. And the scope of works is the same, so there's no increase to the scope of works. So it's just an increase of 300,000 to the project.
Okay. I don't think your microphone's working now. There you go.
Well, maybe I just need to turn it on. So it's actually additional 230,000, because you see 70,000 comes from the infrastructure renewal budget. So it's actually, at the moment, it's additional 230,000 that's sourced from those other two projects where there are underspends.
Underspends within the Beatty Park project.
No, underspends in other projects.
Okay, well, that to me is the same, because that's just taking funding from underspends and putting it into the project, which is becoming much more expensive than initially scoped. So I just...
So these changes don't increase the total capital works, because the team are redistributing the funds.
Totally clear on that.
Yeah, and the overall Beatty Park project is requesting an additional $300,000.
Yep, now I'm clear. Okay, thank you. Could we have some more explanation in the report for Tuesday, please? Thank you. Any further questions on quarter one? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move to CEO items. Item 8.1, underground power update. Questions? Councillor Loden.
The report refers to approximately 85% of properties still not having underground power. And I was wondering, for those 15%, are they just the ones that are located in the zones where we've specifically undergrounded power that we're aware of? Or does that include properties that they've undergrounded their power, but not by putting the poles and wires underground? It's that they've run a line underneath the road because they're on the opposite side of the street to what the power lines go down, which is, I think, is a requirement whenever you demolish a property, you then have to, and you're on that opposite side of the street, you have to put your power underground.
Through Mayor Cole, that is an estimate, and part of the consultant's report suggests that we do spend some time and money doing a reconciliation on the mapping of which properties do and don't have underground power already, and that would require reconciliation with Western Power data as well.
And so the next stage, we'll consider those and then figure out how to appropriately charge people or not, if that's the case. The other one is the report comments around a levy service charge being the most equitable way of charging the rates. And I was just curious about that. If you were in a $2 million house or a $500,000 house, you would pay the same charge to get your power undergrounded. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the service charge can change depending on the property, but we're working on averages here. So for the purposes of modelling and putting this to council for a high level consideration, we would be working on average per property for that connection.
So when the service charge is charged, it would be differentiated between properties then? Or it's still to be determined?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this would need to be mapped out in some extensive detail by Western Power to determine each property's needs and connection requirements, because there can be complications on the site.
So it might be more a function of the complexity of the site rather than it being just each site is the same price. And then we would need to consider how we manage that so that one person isn't paying 20 grand to get their site connected and the guy next to us paying 1,000.
Through you, Mayor Cole, most local governments do essentially set a per property price and absorb some variations along the street. And given the differential in prices between a $2 million house and a $500,000 house, is GRV through rates an appropriate potential way to provide an equitable way of raising the necessary funds? Through you, Mayor Cole, it would be up to council to determine what they're most comfortable with in terms of financing options and that consideration around equity amongst property owners.
But that option would be part of the things that the options that is presented to council when this comes back. So it's not, this is because the consultant's report specifically talks to the recommendation of sort of charge per household, but we're not at this point making that decision, when we will consider options like a rate in the dollar charge across residents. Sorry, is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, part of the intent of this report was to be able to get some high level feedback from council on and provide some direction on where, if we do some further work, where we should focus our efforts in terms of funding options. So we're very keen to understand where council may be at on a new program in general and some direction on implementation in practice.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Just looking at the wording of the recommendation, I note that it talks to requesting administration to seek feedback on underground power options from the community panel. I guess similar to the asset management question I had, is that if the recommendation is endorsed as is, there's no direction to administration as to the priority that council would place on these works and when we would expect to see that information come back. Now we're in the briefing notes and we're able to get some consideration in terms of resourcing and perhaps a little bit more information on next steps that need to be undertaken, so that with a view to potentially crafting a fifth point around a further report to council and the timelines where that would be appropriate.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we'd be very happy to do that. And again, we were trying to get a steer from council on how much more additional work in this direction we should be doing. The community panel process in recommendation 4 would be essentially seeking to replicate the process we went through on the asset management strategy with the panel that's convened. Our experience was that was very useful and provided a good level of independent and objective feedback from the community. And we think this subject matter could equally be applied to a community panel process. When we first commissioned the consultants, we were We thought there might have been some urgency about when Western Power may announce its next program following the SUP. My current understanding is that it's not imminent in the next few months. We probably would have a little bit more time to play with. But if council wanted us to undertake that consultation with the community panel, we could do that within this financial year. So it would allow council to decide whether or not any provision should be made as part of the annual budget process going into the middle of next year.
Could I ask a follow-up question? I'm not entirely sure what we would be asking the community panel at this stage. There's so many assumptions, including sale of assets at $20 million. Which assets would we do that? Would we invest it in underground power? And I guess my question is, at the end of the report, it says that council, if the council decides to proceed, that administration would prepare a business case with options and more detailed advice on resourcing implications. And my question is, would that not be the next more appropriate step, so that when we go to the community panel and the community, we're very clear about what we're asking them to comment on? Because the number one question, I'm trying to ask a question, isn't the number one question about underground power usually going to go to what will the cost be? What will the cost be to the city? Whether that's through sale of assets, whether that's through loan repayments, over what period of time, and what would be the cost to the residents. So my question is, would we be better off swapping out that clause to talk about more of a sort of options paper with more detailed information for council? And also a simpler question is that in relation to the clause around creating an underground power reserve, I understood we already have one.
Through Mayor Cole, part of this recommendation would be that we put some substantial money aside, or generate substantial money, or have a plan to be able to fund an underground power program.
Okay, well, just in relation to the existing underground power reserve, which only has about $200,000 in it, is there any reason why we can't simply use that reserve as a criteria? You know, is the criteria that is different to what we'd have to do? Or I just don't understand why we need to establish a new reserve if we already have one. And if it's about the money, then obviously that has to flow into it, and that hasn't happened yet. So that just a question on that, and just a question on why we wouldn't consider doing the business case options prior to engagement with the community panel, in summary.
Through Mayor Cole, that would be up to council. The high-level options are contained in the consultant's report. There are not really any other options that weren't considered by the consultants. We'd be looking for a steer from council on what the preference would be on funding. To summarise the proposition, we would be suggesting that the beneficiary pays, which is the property owner, assuming 70% of property owners pay the service charge up front. There'd be some property owners that may be seeking to be able to repay that service charge over something like 5, 7 or 10 years. And essentially all the city would need to do is have somewhere between $2 and $4 million in the bank to be able to fund those terms for property owners who didn't pay that service charge up front. So we're not talking about anything which is unachievable, but it would involve either a rates increase to generate that money to put it into a reserve to be that rolling fund, or the option in the report also mentioned a potential asset sale, and Councillor Erdens asked us about debt funding that rolling reserve as well.
I think my question is, could we not then receive some more detailed financial scenarios? Because we need to understand borrowing limits, ability to repay loans, what assets we're talking about, what would actually be prepared to sell to put towards this. And if we're talking about rate increases, we're also talking about doing that to meet the asset sustainability question. So my question is, are we actually ready to go to a community panel without having a more detailed analysis of what we can actually put to a community panel as affordable options?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't think we'd want to put anything more detailed than the high-level options that the report suggests, because any more detailed report would be getting down to what specific property owners might be paying.
I guess I would at least want to know, if we're talking about going to a community panel and saying we're going to sell $20 million worth of assets, what are we actually speaking of? It's not. Anyway, that's getting into debate, but I'll move on. Councillor Apollo.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think that the question is both the recommendations 3 and 4, you would think we're not in a position to actually do those, because you would think that the logical time to do that is after the CEO's engaged with Western Power on the options. And in terms of the reserve, from an accounting perspective, I mean, unless you have some information, then it would probably be inappropriate to try and quantify what an appropriate reserve would be without that information. Sorry? Then my question is, can the administration please consider whether recommendations 3 and 4 should be deferred?
You're learning the art of the council briefing. It does take a bit of adjustment. Doing well.
I did have one other question. It was about the consultant's report. They made a comment in section 10.1 about the problems caused by solar. And then they made another remark in section 10.4 in relation to the fact that nearly 23% of Vincent dwellings have solar, but they don't tie the two. So I'm asking if we could get clarification from the consultant about what the impact on a high take-up of solar would be on a possible implementation of an underground power program.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Thanks, Councillor Apollo. That's a good point. Some of that information related to Section 10, solar and battery uptake by households, that was provided directly by the city to the consultant. So that's our in-house information about our understanding of the solar uptake in the community. The bottom line is that regardless of, even if there was a massive uptick in solar, even with a massive lowering in cost of household batteries, it would still be a requirement for nearly all households to be connected to the grid, unless there was an exceptional circumstance.
I guess just to rephrase the question is, when we look at the options, it would be good to have a further understanding as to what a high take-up of solar power would be, whether that's likely to incur additional costs for residents who have solar if we proceeded to underground power. It's just about what the impact of this program would be for local governments that have a high solar uptake, given that they've raised that point in the report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, part of Council's request was to provide some commentary around technology, solar and battery uptake, rather than the consultants providing that. The two are essentially distinct and separate. Households or property owners are choosing solar on their own cost benefit. It doesn't negate the requirement for them to still have a good connection, because there'll be a time when the solar won't be able to recharge the batteries for a particular point in time, and for emergency purposes, all households will still need to be connected to the grid, and whether the powers are overhead or underground, that wouldn't impact what households are doing on their own cost benefit analysis.
Any further questions on underground power? Okay. Item 8.2, Sustainable Environment Strategy 19 to 24 Progress Update. Any questions? Councillor Loden?
Just on the last comment at the end there, it talks about the contract being signed for our renewable energy supply from 3 wind turbines. I just wanted to check. My understanding is that we've signed this, but there's a certain number of other local governments that need to sign it. And so is that contract now effectively unconditional? Have we had enough people sign up?
Through your Mayor Cole, the city has till I think the end of this month. I'll just have to double check that, to the end of November, to indicate its willingness to participate and the terms in which aspects that we would participate in. My understanding is that the indications from councils are that it will be oversubscribed in terms of the numbers. So it is a live and feasible project.
Any
Right.
further questions?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
And then there's this opportunity to include the some of the other sites and the non-contestable sites. So we'd basically be 100% renewable energy by 2025 potentially.
Through your Mayor Cole, if we're able to access those additional non-contestable sites. So the progress looks good. And so this would be a massive bring forward of what we were planning in terms of our renewable targets on electricity.
And then just on FOGO, so now with the rollout happening, we will see roughly a 90% reduction in our waste emissions. But my understanding is that there will be some kind of carbon abatement potentially created from that. And do we know if those credits come back to us as the city or if they will be held by the waste provider?
Yes, my college, can you check those figures? 90%. We do have a conversation about FOGO, Councillor Oden and I, so I'll have a chat with him and see what I can do about getting those answers before next week.
Any other questions? Okay. 8.3 council briefing and ordinary meeting of council dates for 2021. Just noting the first council meeting's been brought forward by a week. Any questions? Thank you, administration, for that. 8.4 appointment of council members to Chief Executive Officer Performance Review Panel. Any questions about this or how the panel works? Okay. 8.5 appointment of council members to the Metro West Joint Development Assessment Panel. Any questions about the JDAP or how it works? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Miko. I just wanted to point out an error in the item that has yourself down as Councillor Toppelberg's alternate when I'm in fact Councillor Toppelberg's alternate at the moment.
Oh, didn't even pick that up. Thank you.
Through Mayor Cole, we'll correct that for the OCM.
Probably historic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the previous, might have been 2 years ago. And just to highlight the, any new members would be required to do training with the Department of Planning.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Given that one of the members, current members to the period 27 January 2022 is Councillor Toppelberg, who's no longer a councillor, do we need to, does the wording need to be altered because the new member would need to be appointed from now?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll double check this, but the appointments weren't going to commence until January because of that point I made about all new members needing to undertake the mandatory training with the department. So the departments has given us additional time.
So the alternate just covers in the meantime? Yeah, okay.
And this doesn't in any way replace the fact that we already have 3 council members who have been appointed. This is only effective as of the 27th of January. Yep. Okay. Okay. Um, 8.6 appointment of council members and community members to the City of Vincent Audit Committee and amendment of terms of reference. Can I just ask a question about when we're actually getting the community members information through? And just in general for this as well as all of the groups.
To you, Mayor, I expect that will be out by Friday. Both the list of nominations and the recommendations for community member appointments.
If it could be any earlier, if it's available, I think that would be appreciated given that the meeting's on Tuesday. And I also wondered, is administration actually going to do a ranking process and make recommendations? as part of that?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we're oversubscribed for the numbers of positions on the advisory groups.
I think previously we might have just had a long list. I think it really does help, particularly if we've got shortened time period to consider. If there's actually a sort of recommendation based on experience, etc., that would be helpful. Thank you. Any questions on audit committee? Okay. And 8.7, appointment of council members and community representatives to advisory groups. Any questions about any of the advisory groups? No, I'm going over to Councillor Loden. He looks more sure. He's got his hand up more forcefully.
It's all about being assertive, Councillor Hallett. For the wrap, I'm wondering how we would go about having a non-council member as the chair of that, if we were to appoint at our first meeting one of the ATSI members of to be the chair, and that we basically allocate a council member as a deputy chair as a backup to that person. Is that possible under the current terms of reference? And if not, can I request an amendment to facilitate that?
Through you, Mayor, the current policy for advisory committees provides that the advisory group chairman is to be appointed by council, and then it goes into that preferably the advisory group should be chaired by a council member, if possible, or by then by a senior city officer. So to accommodate that, we'd need to amend that policy to reflect the ability to for the RAP to appoint its own chairperson.
Based on what you've said there, is it possible for, at the first RAP meeting, the RAP working group to put forward somebody as the chair and then that get ratified at the next council meeting, given it's just a preference that it's a council member or a senior staff member, but we could choose to not follow that preference?
Through the chair, probably the best means would be to appoint an interim chairperson so the meeting can actually commence and then go through that process.
I think it's fantastic. So if we can just get some advice on how to make that happen so we can consider it at the next meeting, that would be great.
My other query was just around for the nominees in the, obviously we don't have the list of names, but what would be good is to understand which of those people are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent as well, recognising that we've had requests that the RAP effectively be solely Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from our community, and council and members and council staff. So as a consideration too.
Any further questions? Okay. Last item for the evening. Oh no, sorry, there's two more. 8.8 information bulletin. Any questions? Last item for the evening, 11.1. This is sorry, is this wholly confidential? I thought that the front part of the report was not confidential. It's a wholly confidential item. Sorry, I missed that. Why is that? I can understand the attachments, but I'm not sure why the report is confidential.
The attachment should be the only confidential item. The report itself is should be open to the public.
And can I just check that it is, because Docs on Tap isn't working for now, going off the internet. Is it, has it been included wholly as a confidential item? It has, okay. Perhaps that could be treated the same as the others unless there's a reason for it, yep, to be confidential. So that is a confidential item at the moment, but do we have to treat it as such? No. Are there any questions, not on the confidential attachments where there's personal information about the candidates, but are there any questions on the report itself on Leadable Gardens? No, that makes it easy. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Congratulations, new councillors. You have officially made it through your first briefing. Well done. And I will thank everyone for your attendance and declare the meeting closed at, use my phone, 8:56 p.m. Thank you.